this is Marina from Darkstar Astrology, bringing you the history of the Decans. Now, I finally finished this book that I've been working on for about 5 years, and now all 36 Decans are actually finished in one book. And so I thought it would be a good time to do a video to explain how to use them and a little bit about their history as well, because some people don't really know what the Decans are. I think they need to be explained. So, what I'm calling the book is Wheel of Stars. Now, with the Decans, I've been working through them slowly on the website, and as they've become available, you've been able to buy them as a single book. But now they're available all together for a bargain price of $36, so it works out $1 per Decan. But if you can still buy them as single books if you want, and that's available on the website. So the history of the Decans begins 3,000 years BC, and it was based on a set of stars that appeared on the horizon at the sunset. Although the stars are a nightly phenomena, this Egyptian stellar calendar was actually a solar one. Now, early calendars were lunar, dividing the month into 13, with each having 29.3 days. The Decans fit neatly into 360 degrees of the circle, which were divided into 36 sets of 10, which is almost a perfect year. However, we are left with 5 to 6 days extra every year, and the Egyptians said these extra days were outside of time and separated the old year from the new. Now, Saturnalia of the Romans would carry a similar theme of thinking that these were other times, but since all the Decans were under the jurisdiction of some god or other, we could say that those extra days were actually godless ones. So you could see why the rules were turned upside down for Saturnalia with the Romans. But for the Egyptians, on the other hand, they said that those extra days were considered actually to be even more holy. So over time, different gods have presided over each Decan, so that there's no hard or fast rules over who rules them. Austin Kopok, who wrote another book on the Decans, The 36 Faces, lists all the various gods and goddesses for each Decan. But in the past, the main star within the given 10 degrees was given rulership of that Decan. Of course, with precession, after 720 years, a Decan would begin a whole 10 days later. So assigning a star complete rulership of a whole Decan was just not a good long-term plan. It is interesting, though, that if you look at the lunar mansions which come to us from the Arabs, you can see that they work on a similar principle. There are 18 lunar mansions, and their meanings come from the main star of that sector. Again, we suffer from precession, where the constellations have moved with time. Now, these lunar mansions were very popular with medieval and Renaissance astrologers, and they used them in the making of astrological talismans. Some astrologers, like Christopher Warnock, still actually practice these traditions today. Back in the West, Hellenistic astrology changed the way that Decans were used. The Egyptians had assigned meaning to the Decan from the influence given to it by the god or the spirit, but this was replaced by the Ptolemaic order of dignity assignment, where rulership was given by the 7 planets in order of the slowest to the fastest. So we go backwards from Saturn to Jupiter, Mars, and so on. Interestingly, the year for this system, also known as the Chaldean system, starts at 0 degree Leo, and we work backwards from there. So that's probably where the Sphinx comes from as well. Now, the Decans were referred to as faces in medieval texts, and the Ptolemaic order of the planets was also used for planetary hours and planetary days. The 4th century Sicilian astrologer Firmicus Maternus is among many who placed great emphasis on the Decans' use, saying that a planet in its own decan was as good as in its own sign. So that's a quote from Sky Script. Often there is some confusion about who are the rulers of the decans, but I prefer to use the Ptolemaic order. But a case can be made for the sign system. And this was also a method used by Hellenistic astrologer Marcus Manilius. But a similar system is popular today, where it goes with the signs. This is called the triplicity system. And the way this works is that Aries would rule Aries Decan 1, Leo would rule Aries Decan 2, and Sagittarius would rule Aries Decan 3. I hope this isn't getting a bit too confusing. So it goes like that. And that just makes more sense to me than the Manilius's model. And it gives another dimension to the decans. So I have added those modern rulers to the final version of my decan books. So I have them as well as the Chaldean system. Now, the decans get a little lost in time, as does astrology in general, during the Dark Ages, which run from 500 AD to 1500 AD. This time period covers the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The decans become the Dracanas in the Vedic system, and then we have the translations from the Greek to Arabic and then back to Latin again. Finally, the decans are revived by Renaissance astrologers, alchemists, and magicians. And it's here that the notion of pictorial representations of the decans come for use in talismans. Now, there are some very amusing and evocative verses that describe each decan, and these descriptions turn up in grimoires and various occult books. Here's an example found in my favourite magic book, The Picatrix, and this is for my rising sign, which is Gemini Decan 2. So this is a man whose face is like an eagle and his head is covered with linen cloth. He is clothed and protected by a coat of leaden mail, and on his head is iron helmet, above which is a silk crown, and in his hand he has a bow and arrows. This is a face of oppression, evils, and subtlety. Now, at some point, I was going to illustrate each of these decans, and I will one day, but what I'm using now is I found an artist who actually has illustrated them, and I'm using those illustrations in my moon reports, so you'll see them there. Now, you will find there are many different descriptions of the decans that have evolved over time, and Austin Kopok, in his book, he lists all of them in the appendix, so you can look them up there. Now, it looks like Kopok was inspired to title his individual decans after the imagery that you find on the faces, and that's why his book is called The 36 Faces. So my approach, though, was to use the fixed stars in a similar way Diana K. Rosenberg did in her book, The Secrets of the Ancient Skies. That's what it's called. Now, she divides her zodiac into star sets that are only 3 degrees wide. And it's very interesting from a fixed star point of view, really detailed, and has great references for the constellations. But however, when I was reading, I just found I couldn't see the wood for the trees with each star set, and they all, dividing them into such small divisions meant there was really no clear distinction between them. So for beginners, you can really get quite swamped by all that information, and for the advanced, it's a great resource all the same. So when I started writing the decans back on the website in 2013, Austin Kopok's book had not come out, and I was just writing the general meanings for the decan as a whole without the planets or the angle-specific meanings. And then I started adding the sun and the moon meanings due to my use of the decans in the moon reports. Then Bernadette Brady also had a book which inspired me to add the planetary meanings also, which is called Star and Planet Combinations. So I was really eagerly awaiting for the 36 Faces Austin Kopok wrote, and that came out in 2014. And then I was further inspired to add the individual planetary meanings to my own version. And we must not forget that 1930s astrologer Vivian Robson also has the planetary meanings for most of the major fixed stars individually in his book. which also helps me build up my own interpretations. But many find Robson's interpretations a little too harsh and old-fashioned. He didn't mince words, but I find them amusing and rather quaint, so that's why I've included them. And you can get his material free online as part of the superb site Constellation of Words. Highly recommended. Go and check it out. Now, as far as using the Decans to understand your own chart, I need to explain a few things. The fixed star interpretations in certain areas of the zodiac are far more dramatic and dark than other areas, and some stars are considered downright unfortunate, and they are often branded as evil. Now, astrology, like the tarot and the I Ching, contains all colours of the rainbow and all seasons. And the Decans are a book of archetypes, and they are multifaceted. So in writing this book, I had to honour the traditional interpretations of the fixed stars, but I also tried to update them for use in the 21st century. I also hope that I have shown that with every negative star, there's always the option of a positive transmutation. In the same way, an overly successful and fortunate star can also flip into debauchery and excess. And astrology is not that much different than the Bible or other religious works, in that if it's read too literally, it becomes dogma. So it's up to the individual to use these tools and maps and not let the tools use you. As the saying goes, a bad workman always blames his tools. And you could also say that a bad soul always blames his Saturn rising. So how do we use the decans in your horoscope? Now, no one really knows how astrology works, but I have been doing this long enough to recognize patterns when I see them. History repeats, cycles repeats, but we aim not to keep going round in circles, but to spiral forward. A decan can be practiced at a very base level, i.e. at the root chakra, survival level, depending on the stage of evolution of the individual. A difficult decan, though, can be a gift in disguise. It can be challenging like Saturn, but the universe always rewards hard work. Another problem with the traditional astrology, seen through the eyes of modern astrology, is that the whole chart becomes you. So therefore, all the negative, unfortunate stars are you. So this chart is all me astrology could actually be considered quite narcissistic. Now, the way I read a chart follows the traditional approach, in which your rising decan is the only point of the chart that describes you personally. The ascendant is your persona and vehicle for this lifetime. And the position and decan of the ascendant ruler is also descriptive of your personality as well. And obviously all the aspects to it too. The moon's decan describes your karma, genetic memory, your mother, how you experience the divine feminine, and challenges you will face in whatever house your moon rules. The sun's decan describes your dharma, higher self, your father, how you experience the divine masculine, and the challenges you will face in whatever house the sun rules. We're essentially a trinity, and the signs come in trines of elements too. 3 signs for air, earth, etc. So many religions also have this triad: the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit of Christianity, Brahma in Hinduism, mind, body, and spirit of the New Ager, or the triple moon goddess in the maiden mother crone for the pagans. Now, let's have a look at the problem of those dark stars. So, horoscopes are a gateway drug to the psychedelia that is astrology, but I'm not a fan of mind-altering drugs, but it's quite a good analogy because it's just as dangerous to absorb knowledge if you don't understand the fundamentals of natural law. Astrology novices can become fearful of the power of the planets, and that fear can generate a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, with the internet and technology, there is easy access to drawing up your chart and finding the meanings yourself. And this is all great and can be empowering, but like looking up illness symptoms online, you can also convince yourself you are doomed by your decans. So the problem is there are no longer the great universities of the past where astrology was studied as part of a wider curriculum of philosophy, medicine, alchemy, and astronomy. Knowledge was far more holistic. Nowadays, most people come to astrology via sun sign columns and women's magazines, which are seen as light-hearted, harmless entertainment. Astrology also falls under the realms of self-help psychology too, which means it's supposed to make you feel better about yourself. So it's no wonder then a novice coming from that kind of environment balks when they read that their sun falls in Taurus Decan 3, which contains scary star Algol. Now, this beauty causes misfortune, violence, decapitation, hanging, electrocution, and mob violence. It gives a dogged and violent nature and causes death to the native or others. It is the most evil star in the heavens. So I picked that example because it's the most famous of the nasties. So how do we deal with that? First of all, that is a general interpretation of the star. It's not specific for the sun or any planet that aligns with Algol. The most negative manifestations of the star tend to appear in event charts and in horary question charts as they describe a moment in time. But in a natal chart, we are talking a whole lifespan. So these energies could erupt only at a certain time when triggered by a planetary transit or eclipse, for example. Then there's the question of what that Algol planet even represents. It may describe your partner or enemies, 7th house ruler, or a parent or your boss, 10th house ruler. Maybe it's for you to slay this Algol potential. For my example, when you look at the whole of Taurus Decan 3, you will see there are other influences. Some planets do better than others, and it's just one of the stars that are there. So the interpretation is far more complex than that just one star. And the tarot card for the decan must also be considered. And in this case, it's not a negative card. This decan does happen to be ruled by the greater malefic Saturn in both Chaldean and triplicity systems. So you can see that it is a bit of a double dark though. But Saturn is a representation of winter, and in the West, nothing grows much in the winter times. So in a sense, it's not a sunny growth time, but it is a resting hibernation time. These times can be melancholy and lonely, but the point I'm making here is that we cannot isolate any decan and brand it as unfortunate. We have to see it in context with the wheel of the year. And just like the wheel of fortune in the tarot, luck ebbs and flows, and nature is constantly in flux and in the process of birthing and dying. So when we look at our own charts, then that wheel is always turning. We have to fight the monster in the basement at some point, and each time we do makes us stronger. Someone with Taurus Decan 3 as their rising decan will relish in slaying demons and will love to play devil's advocate. The decan's potential may be switched on mostly when the ruler is under an outer planet transit. So with this example of Taurus will be switched on when it's your ascendant in the solar return, or by perfection, or when Taurus is activated by a period of zodiacal releasing. And those last two are advanced techniques, but I'm trying to indicate that even if you do happen to have a somewhat challenging decan as your rising one, it still isn't going to be active all the time. There are other decans like Taurus Decan 3 that might be regarded as equally challenging. So for those of you who have them in prominent places, you need to consider that they really are just 1/12 of the pie of life. Yes, as the ascendant, they will affect you the most as it's the most personal point of the chart, but it's not your core being. It is the incarnation, the vehicle that you've been given. Think of it as an acting role that you've been given to play. So in the case of Taurus Deccan 3, you can play out both the demon slayer and the demons. A lot of us love to play the baddie anyhow, and you do get the most interesting lines. The ascendant is not the soul, remember, since we build our soul over many lifetimes. The most challenging acting parts, like these decans, just give us more grist from which to carve our diamond self. You also have the opportunity to try out other roles too during your lifetime, as your ascendant also progresses through the chart. Every 10 years we get a role change and a new decan to play with. Our root chart is always there in the background though, which is why it's called the radix. Now that's kind of our default position when we can't be bothered to try anything new, or our soul has just had too much change via transits to cope with. Now, for those of us who have super lucky rising decans, don't think you can rest on your laurels. One can easily get complacent and approach the world with an air of entitlement. Again, when the chart progresses, you might have to work on maintaining the decan you were born with, rather like working out at a gym to keep your figure. As a starting point, then, I would place the rising decan as the most important one, followed by the decan and house position of the chart's ruler. Traditional astrologers regard the ascendant ruler as the steersman and the chart is the ship. Next in importance come the sun and then the moon. The decan of your descendant should describe the sort of partner that you're attracted to or tend to attract. And again, look at your descendant's ruler for more information. Your midheaven decan and its ruler's decan will describe your career, and your IC and its ruler will describe your family of origin. So the structure of the ebook. Now you will see as you go through the decans that some will have more fixed stars than others, and not all decans have specific interpretations for the planets in them either. Therefore, some individual decan ebooks will have more pages to them, and this is just how the constellations have been arranged, and they're not uniform. Now, Taurus, Gemini, and Scorpio, Sagittarius, in particular, seem to be the most jam-packed because they fall across the Milky Way. You'll see there's more stars there if you're lucky enough to have clear skies. The so-called 13th sign of Ophiuchus falls across the latter part of Scorpio and Sagittarius, and I found that I had a lot to say about those decans. Then the decans ebooks start with a very general meaning section, followed by a list of the fixed stars in that decan and their meanings. And every 10 days, I post the weekly fixed stars, which lists all the fixed stars that the sun connects with during that time. So you can look at that post to get an idea of what the fixed stars section is like in the book. Now, the sun moves 1 degree a day. So a larger, closer to Earth star will have more mythology attached to it, with more influence over more days than a smaller, distant star. So you can read more about the fixed stars themselves also in an article on the website that's called Using Fixed Stars. I'll give you the link to that below. And after that, in the ebooks, I've listed their meanings for the sun, moon, ascendant, midheaven, Mercury, Venus, and Mars in the decans. Now, there's also lists of famous people and the events with these planets in the decan. And in time, I'm going to add Jupiter and Saturn meanings, which work better on a more mundane level. And I think I'll possibly add Uranus and Neptune too, as Robson actually includes their meanings in his interpretations. But for now, I'm going to give this project to rest and release the Outer Planet meanings as a volume 2, probably at some point in the future. So until then, I hope this video gives you a better idea of how to use the decans and help remove any fears of their sometimes severe interpretations. Astrology is part of an array of divination tools that you can use to ignite your intuition, weed out demons, and know thyself. But a toolbox would not be an effective one if it didn't contain any sharp blades. So that's how I look at the fixed stars. All right, then, that brings me to the end. Thanks for listening, and do come to Darkstar Astrology to check out the ebook. There's a sample on each of the Deccan posts. All the best. Bye-bye.